Friends, I have another small card for our sermon today. So hopefully it won't end up as long as the one last week, unless that is the Spirit's leading. But today we're continuing with our Curious Stories series, and curious is used in two ways in the Curious Stories. One is it's intriguing stories like, oh, that's strange, or gosh, I never thought of that. And the other way curious is used is inquisitive. That is, what's going on in that story? Or the people in the story are asking questions. And both of those things are true for our story today. And today's story from the Bible is what's called a call story. And a call story is when God summons or calls or asks someone to do something for God, which in my children's message, I deeply believe, and I think the Bible would totally support this, that all calls to do something are doing something for God. But today we're going to zero in on a story about Samuel, an 11 or 12-year-old boy who is called to do something for God, and how he is called. So this requires, I think, a little bit of background, because if you jump right into this story, you're not really sure where you are and what time in history this is and who these people are. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to read our scripture, and then share a little bit about what I think it means to, particularly today, where some church leaders are going to be installed, and one ordained for the first time to do God's work in the church. So first of all, the time frame of this is a while after the Exodus out of Egypt. It's probably at least a couple of hundred years, maybe 300 years even. So the time is after that, but before there are kings in Israel. Before King Saul, the first king, before King David, and before King Solomon. We're in a transition time, we're in an in-between time, but things are about to change and move in the direction of the kings. And so we're about 10 centuries before Christ. It's hard to take our mind back that far. And we're in the Iron Age. If you follow ages like Bronze Age, Iron Age, etc., we're in the Iron Age, where iron has been developed and used in war and other things. The place where we are is a really interesting place. It's called Shiloh. Shiloh is not right now a place like it was then. Shiloh is 30 miles about north of Jerusalem. Jerusalem wasn't really there like it is now. Shiloh was the religious center at this time. So Shiloh is the place where people go on pilgrimage to visit with God and to gather together. Shiloh is the place where there's a sanctuary, and it's a pretty permanent structure, and it's there for more than 300 years. And in that sanctuary is the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is the big box where the Israelites carried the scrolls or the stones of the Ten Commandments through the wilderness for 40 years. And this Ark of Covenant, which is supposed to represent God's presence, is now in this sanctuary in Shiloh, where people go and gather and worship. Now, the people here are really interesting to me. So there are mainly two people in this story. One is named Eli, and he is an older man. He is losing his sight. It's mostly gone. And he is the head priest of this place in Shiloh. So he's the head priest man in charge of the place and in charge of the worship of God. But Eli has a helper, an apprentice, I guess you could say, and his name is Samuel. Samuel, we figure out by putting the pieces together, is somewhere around 11 or 12 years old. So is that a tween, between teenager and a child. And so he's called a boy in this, but he's around 11 or 12. Fascinating history to Samuel. Samuel's mom was named Hannah. Hannah and another woman were the wives of one man. And the other woman, this sounds real familiar for the Bible, right? The other woman could have babies and had babies, but Hannah could not. So Hannah would go to Shiloh on pilgrimages and pray and pray and pray to have a baby. And she said to God, if you give me a baby, I will give the baby to you. So God granted her petition. She had the baby Samuel. And when he was, let's say, maybe 4 years old, she brought him and gave him to Eli to raise here at Shiloh in the sanctuary. So isn't that a crazy story? Is that a curious story? Anybody been taken instead of preschool to a place and dropped off just to stay there and be raised by a priest? Probably no one. No one's raising your hand. This is unusual, but this is where the story today begins. Eli is sleeping. Samuel is sleeping or staying near the ark. And the other thing you need to know about this situation is that Eli has some evil sons who will be taking over for him. And they are evil because they take the people's offerings for themselves. And without saying too much, there's some women that work at the sanctuary, and they are not nice to them. They are bad. And so they are evil sons. Everybody knows it. And this is where we pick up. I'm reading from 1 Samuel chapter 3, and it's a little bit long, so I'm going to go slowly so we can really enjoy and get into this. And then I'll just share a few words about what I think it means for us today. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time, Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out. That's the lamp that burns all night in the sanctuary. And Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, Samuel, Samuel. And he said, Here I am. And he ran to Eli and said, Here I am, you called me. But he said, I didn't call. Go lie down again. So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, Samuel. Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, Here I am, for you called me. But he said, I did not call my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again a third time, and he got up, and he went to Eli, and he said, Here I am, for you called me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel said, Speak, for your servant is listening. Then the Lord said to Samuel, See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears of it tingle. On that day I will fulfill against Eli all that I have spoken concerning his house from beginning to end. For I've told him I'm going to punish his house forever for the iniquity that he knew, because his sons were blaspheming God, and he did not restrain them. Therefore I swear to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be expiated by sacrifice or offering forever. Samuel lay there until morning, and then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. He said, Here I am. Eli said, What was it that he told you. Do not hide it from me. May God do to you, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all that he told you. So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. Then Eli said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him." As Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The whole plot driver of this really amazing word from God is who is calling. That's how the plot develops. Who is calling? There's confusion about that. There's layers of that. There's going back and forth and not figuring that out until finally it is revealed. So why, it was asked in Bible study, why did it take so long for Samuel and Eli to realize what was going on? Why did it take so long? That was the whole question we had Wednesday night. And there were some good answers, and I can't give them all, of why Samuel thought it was Eli, why that happened 3 times, why it took Eli a while to figure out it was God calling Samuel, and how Samuel then suddenly transformed could hear. And really, I think the bottom line to that is that is how God works. If you have been called by God, and I think all of you have, multiple times probably, isn't that how it works? You think you're feeling a nudging of something, or you hear something in a devotional on the radio or in a song, you hear a phrase, or someone says to you, you should go learn to drive construction cranes, or you should preach sometime, or you should teach a Bible study. And it continues, and eventually you understand that God is calling, that it's God calling. There are layers, there's people, there's phrases. Well, today 4 people are going to have their time to come up and say their real and final yes to hearing a call from God. And it also is multi-layered and interwoven with different things they've heard over their life, things people have said to them, influences on their life that God has sent. For example, each has had a faith journey before being a part of this congregation. Each has been baptized, and there's a story for each that's different. Each has had a reason to come to this congregation. And in fact, each, I would say each, except for Mike, is a member that has come in the last few years, I think in the last 4 years, and one in this year, or late last year. And so there's been a call to come to this congregation, a call to identify with this congregation, a call to commit more and more time to this particular body of believers. And then there's been a call through the nominating committee. So Presbyterians, the congregation sets up a nominating committee, elects them. The nominating committee met in here and sat in a circle, spaced out up here a couple of different times, listened for God's voice, and then called, maybe literally on the phone, called those people that they felt that God was calling to these leadership positions. And then the congregation met, right? After they said they would do it if elected, the congregation met. And the whole congregation said, we agree with this call. We issue this call from God to you. And then the other day we met as a session and listened to people's reasons for doing this, knew the people, and the session called to them, we want you to go. We want you to go that day. Can you see how many different things went into this call today? So the question for these last few moments is, what is that call? What is that call not only to these 4 people today, but what might be your call? And believe me, we're on Call Stories, we're always eavesdropping, and that's okay. We're thinking about, what does that mean to my call, say to my congregation, to my work, to my family as a parent or as a child, to my future? What is that call? So I think, first of all, it's a call to serve and not be served. Samuel was told to say, your servant is listening. Speak, your servant is listening. Church leadership, and really any leadership a believer has or any call a believer follows, it's a servant call. So first of all, to be a servant. Second of all, to listen. We can't really compare this to Israel 10 centuries before Christ. I think that would be a little bit dramatic, but I would say we're in a time of transition. We're in a time of transition in the church. The Church of Jesus Christ is in a time of transition. We're in a time of transition in this church and in our life with the pandemic, United States, all that, all transition. So it's very important to listen. And so we've called these leaders to listen. And I call you today, leaders who are being installed and ordained, your call is to listen. And then finally, your call is to take what you hear. Did you notice how Samuel heard some tough stuff? He heard that Eli's successors were not going to be his sons, and God was going to take care of that. And Samuel did become the successor and led for a long time. So I think your call when you hear from God is to be authentic and realistic and truthful and honest as the congregation is led by the session and other leaders through this transition period. To speak what you hear, to not hold back, because that is the way that God is going to move and work. Just like the sun came up, it's going to move and work and bring a new day. It says at the end of this that Samuel, not a word of his fell to the ground. I think that means he always said the right thing or he always did the right thing. I don't think that's going to happen here. But it also said that he was thought of as a trustworthy prophet. And I think, to close this, that really what that means is he trusted God. He was a prophet that trusted. And when people see leaders trusting God above all, people feel like they're trustworthy leaders. And so that is your call, to serve, to listen, to be authentic with what you hear, and to be trustworthy leaders that trust God. And to God be the glory. Amen.